Okay, great. Give us a little slight background on your...
So what John and Dave asked me to talk about is just sort of water stuff in general, which I do a fair amount of. People misperceive that I am a water lawyer. I am a lawyer, but I'm not actually a water lawyer. I'm a real estate lawyer. I mostly do zoning cases and complicated public-private real estate projects, such as a lot of the buildings that have been built on the Rio Salado have been built using complex public-private partnership financing methods. So I can talk to you about that if you want. My guess is you don't. It's frankly not all that interesting. I got into the water biz largely because I had this recognizable name, and so I got recruited by the city of Phoenix to run for the board of the Central Arizona Project back in the 90s. And at that point, the CAP had been sort of the territory of retired governors and other people who didn't have to do very much. And so the deal was, when you vote, it's like a dead last. It's below state mine inspector. We're the only state in the union that elects the state mine inspector. But somewhere after you vote for that, you vote for the Central Arizona Water Conservation District Board. And you vote for a block of people. It's a nonpartisan office, unpaid, and nobody ever knows who to vote for. It's changed a little bit now. There are actual campaigns for this position. Not sure why, but there are. And so the city asked me to run because they thought I knew something about urban development issues, and they thought I would get elected just purely because people would see the name and they'd go, oh, well, I've heard that before. It's a big pink building in Tempe. Let's vote for that. So I did. I got elected. I didn't do any campaigning of any kind. And that sort of got me interested in the water business. And I think part of what I learned in doing that is that water generally has been treated as a very arcane specialty of engineers, hydrologists, and lawyers. And the public has largely been excluded from understanding water issues. The people who deal with it have made it intentionally complex. They speak in weird coded phrases, they use acronyms that no one can understand, and that's because water for a very long time has been treated as sort of a magic thing in the West. And so as I spent time on the CAP board, I got to thinking about water a lot. And I went off the board in 2005, so I haven't been on the board in a long time, but I still talk about water a lot and write about water a lot, which leads me to the new book coming out next week. Where's the camera? Which has got a chapter on water in it. And the Rio Salado actually is in here a little bit. I am a fierce defender of the Tempe Town Lake, which still has a lot of critics. I think one of the misunderstandings we have about water in Arizona is this notion that it should not be used for anything enjoyable. That it is frivolous to do things like use water to celebrate pieces of the urban fabric. And so you will see cities periodically turning off all their fountains to sort of make people suffer, to remind us that we live in a desert. I think that's a really misguided way of thinking about water. I think water should be thought of as a way of sort of punctuating the urban fabric and celebrating life in the desert. That doesn't mean we should waste it, but putting it back in a riverbed, which is what the Tempe Town Lake is not wasting water. From the time of John Wesley Powell on and the Reclamation era, there was this presumption that the right thing to do with water in the West was to take it out of the rivers, because flowing water in the arid part of the United States was wasting water. Well, now we're sort of coming to have a more sophisticated understanding that having water in rivers is not wasting water. That has all kinds of benefits for wildlife, for heat mitigation, for aesthetics, for all sorts of things. So we're now much more vigorously debating the concept of using water for things other than simply growing crops, which is what started out being the deal. So let me back up for a minute. One of the things I tell people about water is I think you have to start from the most fundamental sort of notion that there are four things you need for human life. You need land, you need air, you need sunshine, and you need water. And basically that's it. If you got those, you can make everything else. But you can't make any of those. Those are given to us in one way or another. Well, only one of those things is readily portable, water. The others are kind of where you find them. And that portability of water is the story of the Western U.S. So you will see, for example, one of the things I take on in this book is a criticism of cities like Phoenix because our water comes from far away. Well, this is, in my mind, a mindless and not very thoughtful critique of a place like Phoenix. All cities are necessarily concentrations of people that draw on a larger area of resources to support them. That's what a city is, a concentration that draws on a larger area of resources. That larger area could be food, it could be concrete, it could be iron ore, whatever it is, it's brought to where people are concentrated. And water is just a commodity like any other commodity, and it's moved to where a city is. The difference is that in the West we move at greater distances. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. Phoenix got rated one of the least sustainable cities in America a few years ago because our water comes from far away. Same survey rated Tucson as more sustainable than Phoenix because Tucson at the time was mining groundwater, pumping groundwater to support the city. Well, this is absolutely contrary to 100 years of Arizona water policy. We have been trying for a long time to get off of groundwater because it's exhaustible. The reason it's called mining is when you use it up, it's gone. And get on to renewable resources, which are flowing streams. So that's an early effort to make a city sustainable that was completely misunderstood by a website called sustainlane.com that got it 180 degrees wrong, just totally got it wrong. The second thing that I think is interesting about water as a commodity is economists talk about public use goods and private use goods. So a private use good is like land. Land in our system is owned. Even if the government treats land, we say the government owns that. There are systems that treat land as more of a common use good. Some of the Spanish traditions in the West that had the concept of ejido, which is the commons, is a common use good. Air in our system is a public use good. Nobody owns air. I mean, you just have a little tank of it, maybe you own it, but basically it's free for the taking. Sunshine is a public use good, free for the taking. Water is the only one of those four fundamental things that sometimes is one and sometimes is the other. When you have water in a glass, that's your water. You own that water. When you pay for it to come out of the tap and use it in your backyard or put it in your swimming pool, it's your water. When you're pumping it up from underneath the ground, underneath land you own, we think of that as a private use good. When water is flowing through your property, it's not a private use good, it's a public use good. You can use it, but you don't get to own it and keep it. You have to allow it to leave your property at the same rate at which it entered your property. That distinction gives rise to one of the complex problems of Western water law, which is that we treat surface water and groundwater as different things. We treat groundwater as one of these private commodities and surface water as if it is a public commodity. And that bedevils Arizona because if you live up near the Upper Verde River and you have a cabin and an acre of land and a pump, you can pump all the groundwater you want, even if you're sucking it out from under the river. That's changing. We are in a long 50-year series of lawsuits about the artificial hydrological distinction between groundwater and surface water, which doesn't make any sense. And we're slowly beginning to break down that barrier and begin to understand some differences about the way water is treated and handled. We also treat water as kind of the ultimate tribal commodity. People we share water with are us. People who are trying to take it away are them. So you all know the apocryphal story, I hope, about the last time one state in the Union brandished arms against another, which was Arizona and California, over the waters of the Colorado River. We didn't think California should be entitled to as much water from the river as they had been allocated by the Boulder Canyon Project Act. And so that led to litigating about it. And B.B. Moore, who lived in a little building right over here in Tempe, was the governor at the time and sent the Arizona National Guard out to try to stop California from building a dam to divert water. And he had like 2 guys from his office with rifles, and that's the last time one state threatened to shoot at another state in the history of the Union. May happen again before too much longer at the rate we're going, who knows. So water's got all these kind of interesting different aspects to it. Let me tell you two other things about water that you need to think of big picture wise. One is that the price of water is really complicated. And it doesn't have much to do with what water costs. Water, for the most part, we treat as free. What you're paying for is the cost of transporting it and treating it to get it to you. And even then, we heavily subsidize it because we, for a long time, thought of water as being this thing that should be, it's necessary for life, so it really should be as close to free as possible. It's gotten a lot more expensive here in the last few years. Those of you who own houses, or if your parents have complained about their water bills, it's gotten a lot more expensive, but it isn't even close to what it actually costs. And the price has very little to do with reality. It has to do with what you can get people to pay and how much it costs to move it somewhere. And there is a fundamental difference between the price of a bottle of water that you buy and own and the price you pay for the right to get a set amount of water all the time. So you'll hear references to the price of water by the gallon or by the acre foot. Sometimes people are telling you the price of the actual water. Sometimes they are telling you the price of the right to receive that much water on an annual basis. And it gets very confusing, and people can't sort of sort it out. Agriculture, for example, pays something like $20 an acre foot for water. At your house, you are paying something like $250 an acre foot for water, or more. Maybe up into the thousands an acre foot for water. An acre foot is an acre of land a foot deep. It is a measurement that is used only in the western United States. Nobody else uses this because it was a measurement adopted by the Bureau of Reclamation. So the next thing you have to understand about water in the West is that Western water has this doctrine of prior appropriation, which is probably a phrase you've heard before, which means that it isn't just whoever wants the water can use it, nor is it like some places in the country, whoever has the biggest pump wins. It's whoever got there first. It's a first in time, first in right doctrine. The reason that exists in the West is that was the doctrine that the legal system sort of invented to encourage settlement of the West. So water is kind of the ultimate economic development tool in the West. We wouldn't be here, we wouldn't be able to live in Stegner's phrase beyond the 100th meridian unless we had a way of capturing and moving water so people could use it. One of the ways we incentivized the settlement of the West was to create this doctrine of prior appropriation. It basically says, we want to settle the desert, so if you run out there and find some water, you get to keep it, and if you settle there. And it's like homesteading, only with water. And that's a problem in today's world because it was a doctrine that worked. It worked really well. And so there's a really lot of people here now, and that's putting serious stress on water going into the future. I mentioned earlier how we have treated water as this sort of magic commodity that is the province of engineers and water lawyers. The view of those people tends to be, tell me how much water you need, tell me where you want it delivered, and leave me alone. I will go get it and bring it. So William Mulholland, the famous guy who dedicated the Colorado, the aqueduct that brought water to Los Angeles. Have you guys ever seen the movie Chinatown? This is a real tragedy that most people in your generation don't see the movie China. It's a great movie. Download it sometime. It's Faye Dunaway, Jack Nicholson, Roman Polanski directed it. And it's about William Mulholland, fictionalized. He's called Mulray in the movie. And sort of the rape of the Owens River Valley to water the San Fernando Valley. Well, when he turns the head gate to flow the water out, he says, there it is, take it. Meaning, I brought you the water you want, you guys fight about what to do with it. We've tended to keep the public out of water decisions. And that's a distinction that's beginning to break down. Because as we bump up against an era of limits, where we can't solve our water problems by going and capturing another river or towing an iceberg or cloud seeding or something else. We're going to have to start to make tough decisions about water. So one of the things about all of this that I think is relevant to the Rio Salado and interesting in the context of the Rio Salado project is at the time the project was proposed, and I'm really, when I say that, I'm talking about the Tempe Town Lake now. At the time that the Tempe Town Lake was proposed, there was this rollicking debate about whether or not we should actually do it, whether it should be filled with water. The Tempe Town Lake, for point of reference, is about 6,000 acre-feet of water. When I use these acre, there's none in it today. There's not even 1 acre-foot in there today, but it's about 6,000 acre-feet of water. We have the right to 2.8 million acre-feet of water from the Colorado River. The Silver Project can deliver about 850,000 acre-feet of water on average, generally, year in and year out. So should we take 6,000 acre-feet of that water, which could support about, each acre-foot will support about 10 people at today's usage rates for a year. So it would support, a lot of people, 120,000 people or something like that. Should we use it for the lake? Should we use it to grow cotton in Pinal County? Should we use it to entice another 150,000 people to move here and live and use it in their houses? Should we use it for golf courses? Should we use it for an Intel factory, which is a heavy water consumptive use? Should we use it for data server farms? Hugely water intensive because of the cooling mechanisms that are needed for them, though some of them are using dry cooling today. Well, we could do any of those things we wanted with it. Or should we put it in a lake where 100,000 people a day see it and get to paddle canoes on it? Or should we leave it in the river and let it flow into the Gulf of Mexico and sort of replenish the riparian systems of Arizona? Well, we ought to talk about that. We ought to talk about those competing uses and how to make those decisions. We don't do that. What we do, rather, is sort of allow that decision to get made through a messy combination of these prior appropriative rights, of pricing, and of just kind of a series of much less comprehensive conversations and dialogues about it. I think the Tempe Town Lake is a good thing. I think it's going to ultimately, already is, resulting in significant economic benefit to Tempe. I think it is something that gives character to what is otherwise a fairly seamless and somewhat uninteresting urban form that we have in the city of Phoenix. And I think it probably makes more sense to use 6,000 acre-feet of water that way than it does using the equivalent amount of water growing alfalfa in Pinal County, where we use way more than 6,000 acre-feet. In the Sun Corridor, that is Phoenix, Tucson, and Pinal County in between, about 70% of the water still goes to agriculture. But people look at the Tempe Town Lake and will say, well, in California, they're having all these terrible water problems, and Tempe is like going to refill this lake that has no purpose. I think it does have a purpose, but I think there's also a whole bunch of differences between us and California. So if you get in one of these conversations with friends or visitors from out of state who want to criticize Arizona, we give you a few ways in which to explain Arizona and Arizona's water situation. We still use, as I said, about 70% of the water in the Sun Corridor still goes to agriculture. The reason we haven't had the problems California has had with regard to water use is that we have diminished the long-term rights to water that agriculture has in a way that allows us in times of drought to shift water from agricultural uses to urban uses. Now, we can't do that with groundwater, but we can do it with surface water, with CAP water and SRP water, and that's what's happened. The second thing is that this overall project has urbanized. So most of SRP is now houses. All of our houses are probably within the service territory of the SRP. In Arizona, in central Arizona, we tend to grow crops and subdivisions in the same place. That isn't true in California or Colorado. In California, people live on the coast, farming takes place in the central valleys, and so the farmers in the cities hate each other and fight all the time. And the farmers have locked up all the water and they won't let it shift to urban uses. Here, as we urbanize, we have converted farms to urban uses, and that diminishes the amount of water being used. I just finished a zoning case this last year down south of Tucson for a 6,000 acre master plan community that is currently a pecan grove. It is the world's largest pecan grove, and it is the largest single groundwater user in the state of Arizona. When that converts to being 22,000 houses, the water use of those 6,000 acres will go down by between 60 and 70%. A pecan tree uses more than a family does in the course of a year. Now, I love pecans. I think pecans are great. The pecan growers are my clients. Over the long term, will pecan growing survive? I don't know. One of the challenges of agriculture, and this is part of what's gone wrong in California. California used to be about growing vegetables. It has increasingly migrated toward nut crops like almonds and grapes for wine. With grapes and almonds, you can't take the water away from them in times of drought. The plants will die. Vegetables you cannot plant. Alfalfa you cannot plant. So alfalfa gets heavily criticized in Arizona because we grow a lot of it and much of it is shipped to China. But when we hit a water crisis, you cannot plant the alfalfa. You can purchase that water from farmers and shift it to higher value uses. Another difference between Arizona and California is that California didn't regulate groundwater until about a year ago. We started in 1980. We started limiting the use of groundwater. And a final difference is, in the last 20 years in Arizona, we have been banking water underground. Nobody else anywhere in the world has done this to the degree we have. There was an article you may have seen a while back in, I think it was the LA Times, that said, if you think the drought in California is bad, wait until you see what happens in Arizona. Now the reason that article says that is that we're the junior right holder off the Colorado River. That was a bargain we had to agree to in order to get the CAP funded by the federal government. We were pissed off about it. Yeah, Ron.
Do you all understand what the CAP is and how it's different from SRP? The Central Arizona Project is the canal system that brings water from the Colorado River to Phoenix and Tucson. The Salt River Project manages the water of the Salt River through Lake Roosevelt in the Phoenix metro area, right?
And they're separate entities. SRP goes back to the early part of the 20th century and the building of Roosevelt Dam. The CAP only goes back into like the late 1960s was when it was started to get built. And the CAP is pumps. It's coming, that water's flowing uphill to get it here. SRP's not. SRP's gravity fed. And like I said, SRP's about 1 million acre feet. We have the right to 2.8 million feet of Colorado River, where the CAP can deliver about 1.6, 1.7 of that. The rest is used on the river. By the way, when I was talking about crops and people, that's going to change. To get more water to central Arizona, we're going to need to start taking water that has been the right of agriculture in Yuma, and then we're going to get more like California. But what I was starting to say is the final difference is we've been banking Colorado River water underground. So when the CAP got built, the idea originally was going to be the farmers would pay for it, whatever it costs to get it here, and then the cities would slowly grow into using it. Well, this is a big thing built by the federal government, so it cost a whole lot more than people thought it was going to cost. It was supposed to cost like $700 million, and it cost more like $4.5 billion. And so the farmers couldn't afford it with the formulas that were used to calculate what they were supposed to pay. So when I was on the CAP board, we had to come up with a way of resolving that problem. And the solution was to have cities buy down the price of water so we could give CAP water to farmers, so we could get them off the groundwater pumps, which they were using federally subsidized electricity to pump groundwater. So the federal government wanted the farmers off the pumps, but it was selling them below cost electricity to use the pumps. Makes no sense. There are lots of these weird ironies in Western water. So the cities were willing to subsidize water for Arizona agriculture primarily to keep it away from California, because California was using most of Arizona's share of the water at that point. And they have the right to do that if we don't use it. But if we want to use it, we get to take it first. Well, what we did with this water then was to bank it in central Arizona using two different mechanisms. One is what's called direct recharge, which is you pump the water here, you flow it out onto the desert, and you watch it seep into the ground. That's it. The other is you pump the water here, you sell it to a farmer below cost. He uses it to water his crops, but the water that he would otherwise have pumped from underneath the ground, you now count as being in lieu recharge. So you treat it as if it was CAP water that was banked underground. And in either case, you build up these huge reserves of groundwater. Through the combination of those two mechanisms, we've banked almost 9 million acre feet of water underground in central Arizona. Nobody else anywhere in the world can even come close to that. That's about, if all water input to the Sun Corridor was cut off, it didn't rain, SRP could deliver 0, CAP could deliver 0. If you don't deliver any of that 9 million acre feet to agriculture, that's about 10 years worth of urban water supply. Now you never do that because none of those will ever go to 0 and you wouldn't want to deliver it at that rate and exhaust it in 10 years. But so when you see this stuff about how the drought is going to hit Arizona worse than California based on the fact that we're the junior right holder, what really annoys me about that is that gets written up in the LA Times or the New York Times or somewhere else as if those of us in Arizona are so stupid it never occurred to us we were the junior right holder. We've known that for a really long time, and we've been trying to protect against that eventuality. The only significant amount of water California has banked against the drought, they banked in Arizona because we did it for them. They pay us a lot of money to do that, which is sort of useful. But, and Nevada's done a ton of that because they're in much worse shape than we are. So we've actually, you know, when you're embarrassed by telling people you're from Arizona because we're embarrassing about a lot of things, this is the one thing we've been really good at. We've done this really, really well. Trying to think what else would be of interest to you guys about Rio Salado or.
Well, I think the distinction between CAP and SRP is really important. And you know, you think about the Salt River Valley Water Users Association and how water businesses cropped up in the territorial period in the early 20th century. The Users Association became the Salt River Project and was associated with the construction of Roosevelt Dam, which formed Lake Roosevelt in 1911. So SRP and the canal system that brings water to the valley from the Salt River happened much earlier. Then you have the Colorado River Compact, which was the first multi-state agreement that established water allocations amongst the southwestern states. And it was very controversial. There's a lot of issues about whether they counted the amount of water correctly that actually flows through the Colorado River. But that was the first.
And the answer is they didn't.
Allocate.
They thought there was a lot more than there was.
Yeah, they messed up.
Yeah, big time.
And that started a basically 40-year process, 45-year process of controversy and legal hassle.
Let me give you the numbers on that. So they made an assumption that the Colorado River has an average annual flow of 17.5 million acre feet. That is just completely wrong. It's more like 12 or 13 probably, we have now discovered much after the fact. But they took that 17.5 million, they allocated 2.5 million to Mexico, and the remaining 15 million they split 7.5 to the upper basin and 7.5 to the lower basin. The upper basin is Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico, and a little piece of Arizona. The line between upper and lower is Lee's Ferry, so slightly into Arizona. The lower basin is Arizona, Nevada, and California. There was then a further split in the Colorado River Compact between Arizona, Nevada, and California that gave California 4.4 million acre feet, Arizona 2.8 million feet, and Nevada 300,000 acre feet. Arizona felt it got screwed. We thought we should get the same amount of water California got. And our argument for that was, first of all, the river flows through Arizona for 300 miles before it ever gets to California and Nevada. Secondly, there is water in the Colorado River that has flowed out of Arizona. The Bill Williams, the Salt, and the Verde form the Gila. The Gila is a tributary of the Colorado. The Little Colorado is a tributary of the Colorado. So some of it's our water that fell in the state. Now the truth is, hardly any of it at the end of the day. The water that's in the river is from Colorado and Utah. It's from snow in the Rockies. But we thought that was a pretty good argument. There is not a single tributary of the Colorado River that flows out of California. Not one. Not a stream. There's a little bit of sheet flow maybe. So we were like, why should California get all of this? And their answer was, we're California. What are you talking about? We've been using it for a long time, first in time, first in right, and we have a way more congressmen than you do. This is the 1950s. We had like one congressman probably when this happened. So we felt like we got screwed when it was split up, and we wouldn't ratify the compact for years. And that's what led to the famous lawsuit, Arizona versus California, which there's a good book, came out about 2 years ago, written by Jack August about Mark Wilmer, the lawyer who ultimately represented Arizona in Arizona versus California. So here's an interesting tidbit. The water in the Tempe Town Lake, what is that? Is that Salt River Project water or Central Arizona Project water?
Mix. Combination, right? Some flows.
Legally, it is basically Central Arizona Project water.
Really?
Because since that is the river bottom, it didn't have rights to SRP water. It was never farmed. You couldn't farm in the river bottom. So when SRP was created, no water rights were assigned to the river. So when it was time to fill the Tempe Town Lake, everybody's scratching their head, how are we going to do this? I was on the CAP board at the time, and they came to us and said, will you cut us a deal to sell us cheap CAP water for this? And we said, sure, we'll give you CAP water to fill it. So the initial filling of the lake was CAP water delivered through the Salt River Project system. The systems are intertied, so you can deliver it. Then what happens is, when the dam bursts, or when you let water out of it, and then you capture water flowing down into it, that is SRP water, but legally it's still treated as CAP water because it's replacement for the water that was spilled. So what happened now is the lake's been emptied by pumping the water in it out and into the CAP, into the SRP canal system, and it's been delivered to farmers. And so then SRP will replace that, but legally it's still treated as CAP water.
Another interesting thing was Arizona, California was settled in '64, and then the effort was to fund the Central Arizona Project, which happened in 1968. The origin of the project studio for Rio Salado is 66, 67. Water's on everybody's mind. You can see political cartoons in our collections from Reg Mann, and you can see all these materials and news articles about the fight with California. It was a huge moment in the 60s, thinking about our future and who we were going to be as a state and how much that depended on water. So clearly, all this effort in Arizona versus California and CAP was a driver for thinking about this riverbed and this river and what would we do.
What else? You guys got questions? Anything else you want to ask?
Is there an effort to remove prior appropriation from state, or what's the status?
Anytime you go to a water law seminar, there's conversations about the need for water law to change and adapt, but that will happen very slowly. The law is largely intended to make it hard for things to change. The law is a tool of maintaining the status quo. That's why we care about stare decisis. That's why we use precedent. That's why judicial decisions are very constrained. That's why we don't like activist judges that are getting criticized all the time. Because the law is supposed to protect people's investments, people's expectations, business operations. The law is supposed to be a brake on society changing too quickly and too dramatically. And that will be one of the hardest things to sort of slowly break down over time. It will change, but it could be 150 years for that to happen. There's a fabulous water law professor at the law school right now named Rhett Larson. If any of you wind up going to ASU Law School or you see something about Rhett Larson doing a talk, he's really good, really cool guy. It's only been here like a year now.
There's
But he grew up in
another
Arizona.
interesting aspect about California using our water. It takes a lot of water to run a power plant. Doesn't take any water to get photovoltaic power, but a power plant, a lot of water. Palo Verde takes a lot of water. It's the largest nuclear generating station in the world, I think. But because we make the power here, they use effluent from the city of Phoenix and Tempe and Mesa that flows down to the 91st Avenue plant, gets some treatment, and then a big pipe goes out to Palo Verde, and they make electricity. That's why California likes that electricity. They're really buying our water when they get that electricity. So they don't have to make electricity in California to
Yeah,
use their water.
Metropolitan Phoenix has one of the highest percentages of water reuse of any city in the world. So when you hear people talking about using more effluent, treated effluent and so on, we're like close to 100%. Now the reason is Palo Verde, because that's where most of it goes. But it gets used at Palo Verde, and then it gets put back into the Salt River bed, where it is recharged back into the aquifers. So we use it twice beyond flushing your toilet.
Well, I think
Okay,
that's
cool.
excellent.
All right, thanks
You're on
guys.
record.
Nice to
Thank
meet you all.
you.
See you, Dave.